Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves nestled in a sun-drenched vineyard, somewhere on the warm, drowsy edge of the ancient Mediterranean. Bees buzz lazily between violet bunches of grapes, the air smells faintly of crushed thyme, and the only real danger is dozzing off under the wrong fig tree and getting pooped on by a pigeon. You're adjusting to this dreamy landscape when a figure approaches, barefoot, crowned in ivy, smelling like raisins and secrets. It's Dionysus. Yes, that Dionysus. God of wine, madness, and very questionable decision-making. He's got a proposition for you. Join him on a casual, centuries, late trip to India. Why, he's not sure either. But it'll involve elephants, interpretive dances, and probably some divine karaoke. You, unfortunately, probably won't survive this if you're expecting anything normal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this sleepy caravan travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand beside Dionysus as he swirls a goblet of wine and talks to no one in particular. He's in that tipsy state where everything sounds like poetry and none of it makes sense. Around him, the maenads, his famously enthusiastic followers, are twirling in slow motion, tripping over grapevines and each other. Satyrs chew leaves while debating whether sandals are oppressive. It's like a music festival that lost its permit 5 days ago and just kept going. Dionysus is mumbling about a dream he had, something involving a tiger, a mango, and a silk turban. India, he says, pointing east as if he knows where east is. They don't even have decent wine. We must go. You want to ask how he plans to get there. You want to ask why he cares. But mostly you want to ask why you're already wearing a leopard print toga. Apparently, once you agree to follow Dionysus, reality begins melting like warm feta. You step into his entourage and instantly feel sleepier. Your footsteps leave little curls of vine behind. Birds begin singing backwards. Time feels thick and slow, like old honey. The road isn't really a road. It's more like a meandering trail paved with soft leaves and giggles. The group travels at a pace that could generously be described as lazy snail. Satyrs strum lyres out of tune. Someone offers you wine. It tastes like fermented figs and confusing life choices. As the sun sets, you all stop under an olive tree, where Dionysus begins a slow monologue about how the moon is actually a grape in disguise. No one disagrees. The maenads lie in tangled heaps, whispering secrets to moss. A satyr is trying to teach ants how to dance. You lie down, using a basket of apricots as a pillow, and gaze up at stars that seem unusually drunk tonight. At some point, Dionysus leans over you and offers a riddle. What's the difference between a man and a fig? You shrug. Exactly, he says, nodding sagely. Exactly. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's journey to India was ever meant to be literal. Some say it was a metaphor for spiritual expansion or inner chaos. Others think ancient Greeks were just really bad at geography. One mainstream historical fact, though, is that Alexander the Great, who also marched into India, was rumored to believe he was following Dionysus's path. So, weirdly, your sleepy wine, God buddy may have inspired real, sharp, sordid invasions. Not that you'll see anything that coherent tonight. As night thickens, Dionysus tells you about his birth, not that you asked. He's got a flair for backstories, and soon you're half asleep listening to tales of lightning bolts, flaming wombs, and thigh pockets. Yes, he was sewn into Zeus's thigh. No, he doesn't want to explain it again. Apparently, being reborn from a thunder, God's leg makes you really into drama and grapes. One of the satyrs starts snoring. A maenad gently puts a wreath of garlic on his head. Dionysus turns to you, eyes sparkling. Tomorrow, he slurs. We start our glorious, nonsensical detour through India. You nod, mostly because your brain is as squishy as a ripe plum. And with that, the god curls up on a bed of moss. using a wineskin as a teddy bear. The forest hums around you, soft and slow. You fall asleep, wondering how this ever became your life, and why you're okay with it. Morning arrives like a cat politely kneading your face. You blink awake to find that the maenads are already braiding each other's hair with ivy, and Dionysus is humming to a wine jug. He's clearly still on whatever mystical wavelength he tuned into last night. The scent of fermenting grapes hangs thick in the air, and a satyr is flossing his teeth with fig branches. You sit up, your toga inexplicably covered in glitter. Somehow, this is fine. Before this very weird journey picks up speed, well, sluggish drift, it seems Dionysus has decided to treat you to the full, unsolicited backstory of his life. 'Cause nothing says epic detour to India like a mythological recap. It all starts with Samael, a mortal woman with a questionable taste in boyfriends. She falls for Zeus because of course she does, and ends up pregnant with his child. This part's standard, issue godly scandal, but here's where things go off the rails. Hera, Zeus's wife and eternal goddess of I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed, decides to mess things up. She disguises herself as Samael's elderly nursemaid, because, again, logic, and convinces Samael to ask Zeus to show himself in his true god form, which is basically like asking someone to microwave you from the inside. Zeus, bound by his sacred promise, reveals his divine self in full thunder and lightning glory. Samael, being quite human, is instantly reduced to ashes. This, as Dionysus will calmly explain while picking olives out of his hair, is where things get kinda weird. Zeus manages to save the unborn baby, Dionysus, by sewing him into his thigh, like a bizarre marsupial. So yes, technically, Dionysus was born twice. First from a mortal woman, then from Zeus's leg. Is this medically sound? No. Is it mythologically fabulous? Absolutely. As Dionysus tells this story, he gestures dramatically with a ladle, the maenads ooh and aha on cue, and a satyr quietly eats your breakfast. You don't complain. It's hard to argue with a guy who has goat legs and very intense eye contact. Historians still argue whether this dual birth tale symbolizes Dionysus's dual nature, half human, half divine, or if ancient storytellers were just making it up as they went. Either way, the story sets the tone. Dionysus is not your typical god. He's born out of chaos, raised in hiding, and destined to make every situation a bit stranger. After thigh birth, he's sent to live with nymphs on Mount Nisa. You'd think this would be peaceful, but apparently, being raised by forest spirits is like going to an eternal summer camp with zero adult supervision and unlimited mead. Young Dionysus learns how to grow vines, mix wine, and throw what scholars might generously call raegers. But things get darker. Dionysus's presence tends to unnerve people. Like, a lot. Mortals don't always handle the whole hallucinogenic god who brings ecstasy and madness thing very well. Some cities worship him, others try to banish him. He starts wandering, first out of necessity, then by habit. And here's your mainstream historical fact for the night. Ancient Greeks really did have mystery cults dedicated to Dionysus, often involving secret rites, ecstatic dancing, and lots of wine. These weren't just parties, they were spiritual experiences meant to dissolve boundaries between mortals and gods. Fringe? Maybe. But deeply influential. Dionysus leans in as he recounts how he first discovered his power over vine and mind. He accidentally turns a grove into a vineyard, just by sneezing. He laughs so hard at a joke that a stream nearby starts bubbling with Pinot Noir. You start to realize that God of Wine isn't just about drinks, it's about transformation, joy into madness, pain into beauty, hangover into, well, still a hangover, but maybe with deeper meaning. The maenads, now sufficiently styled and mildly buzzed, begin chanting a sleepy hymn. It involves a lot of alalas and interpretive shoulder rolls. You're given a tambourine. It's non-negotiable. Dionysus snaps his fingers, and suddenly the whole group is packed up and on the road again. Or rather, on the wandering trail that leads vaguely east. You're beginning to suspect that India might just be a placeholder for wherever the mood takes us. Still, the terrain is shifting. Olive groves give way to dry hills. The air smells less like thyme and more like spice and warm stone. A satyr points at a lizard and insists it's an omen. Dionysus agrees, but only because the lizard winked at him. That night, the god pulls you aside. He says, sipping from a cup shaped like a lion's paw. It's whole India thing. It's not just about wine. It's about bringing me, my essence, to the world, unbottling what's bottled up. You nod slowly, trying to look profound while a maenad balances grapes on your nose. But also, he continues, they have really good elephants. You fall asleep under stars that flicker like candle flames, wondering what sort of divine PR stunt you've just joined. The morning air is dry and warm, smelling faintly of roasted pine and last night's fermented regrets. You wake up halfway through a conga line of satyrs, weaving between olive trees, each one rhythmically bumping into the next like furry dominoes. Dionysus is at the front, skipping instead of walking, scattering flower petals, with the solemnity of someone officiating a wedding between chaos and whimsy. Your legs ache from yesterday's dance, march. It's a term Dionysus coined when he couldn't decide whether to call it a parade or a stampede. As you hobbled toward the god of wine, you realize something very peculiar. You're actually getting used to this. Used to the tambourines. Used to the constant, low, level buzz of tipsy laughter. Used to the occasional goat man trying to show you his collection of cursed acorns. It's somewhere between two particularly tuneless flute solos that Dionysus announces he's going to tell you about his awkward face. You had an awkward face? You ask. Oh, deeply, he says. I was basically a teenage demigod with a vine problem. Turns out, after Thigh, birth and forest, nymph daycare, Dionysus goes on a sort of mystical walkabout. He wanders the earth in search of identity. Half god, half mortal, all confused. And instead of finding peace or self-acceptance, he finds satyrs. Satyrs, as you now know intimately, are half human, half goat beings with boundless enthusiasm for drink, mischief, and terrible poetry. They latch onto Dionysus like confetti on sweat. They think he's a hero, a leader, a provider of wine and chaos. They are not wrong. At first, Dionysus resists their company. He wants to be serious, noble, maybe even a philosopher. But one accidental grapevine explosion later, and the satyrs are throwing him a festival. There's interpretive dance. There's excessive nudity. There's something called goat yoga that you do not want to Google. This is when Dionysus begins to fully lean into his powers. He discovers he can make wine from nothing. Literally. Water, wine, rain, wine, sad tears. Surprisingly strong wine. He learns how to stir frenzy in others. A trance-like state where people abandon fear, doubt, and occasionally common decency. The Maenads, wild women devotees of his cult, begin joining him, drawn by the promise of freedom, music, and a suspicious lack of rules. Historians still argue whether the Maenads were real women or symbolic figures representing liberation and madness. Either way, they're very real to you now. One of them is currently braiding ivy into your hair while humming the same 3 notes over and over. It's oddly soothing. As Dionysus builds his following, cities start to notice. Some welcome him as a liberator, someone who offers an escape from rigid order and grim sobriety. Others, not so much. A king named Pentheus tries to outlaw Dionysus's rights. This goes poorly for him. Long story short, he disguises himself to spy on the Maenads, gets caught, and ends up torn to pieces in a wine-fueled frenzy. Which is honestly a bit of an overreaction, but hey, symbolism. One verified historical detail here. Euripides wrote a famous play, The Bacchae, about this exact incident. In it, Dionysus is portrayed as both charming and terrifying, a god who punishes disbelief not with lightning bolts, but with unraveling sanity. Very on brand. As Dionysus recounts these tales, he chuckles softly. I wasn't always so relaxed. He admits, I used to get angry, vindictive, I once turned a man into a dolphin because he insulted my sandals. That seems excessive. Try walking a mile in grape juice, he says. You hike through a narrow pass lined with whispering cypress trees. The Menads hum lullabies while satyrs skip ahead, clearing stones with unnecessary cartwheels. The path starts to wear in the distance. Drums echo. Slow, thudding, sleepy beats like a heartbeat trying to nap. That night, by the flickering light of a bonfire made entirely of scented herbs, Dionysus teaches you the sacred stumble. It's part dance, part guided collapse, and fully ridiculous. Everyone gets involved. Even a lizard joins in. Later, lying on a soft bed of thyme and goat hair, don't ask. You find yourself whispering a question you didn't mean to ask out loud. Why India? Dionysus stares into the fire for a long moment. Because it's far, he says. Far enough to forget where you started. Far enough to matter. Then he burps quietly, rolls over, and falls asleep with a contented sigh. You close your eyes, lulled by the distant tapping of satyr hooves and the slow crackle of burning rosemary. The stars above don't twinkle. They pulse like drunk fireflies. You're not sure if you're following a god, a myth, or just your own sleepiest self, but it's too late now. You've already learned the sacred stumble. You awaken mid-stumble, which is either a sign of divine rhythm or the unfortunate side effect of sleeping in a pile of uneven satyr tales. The morning is slow and amber, with mist curling like sleepy thoughts between the trees. Dionysus is already awake, or at least sitting upright, sipping from a wine cup and blinking slowly, as if remembering how reality works. Today, he announces, we begin our grand conquest of India. You glance around. There's no army, no supplies, just a trail of snack crumbs, goats in sunglasses. Don't ask. And a group of followers whose idea of strategy involves synchronized lounging. You raise an eyebrow. Oh, Dionysus says, grinning. It's not that kind of conquest. Apparently his plan is to inspire India into submission. No swords, no siege engines, just wine, music, and interpretive dance. You'll be seducing the subcontinent with vibes. It's a very Dionysian approach to empire building. As your odd caravan moves forward, the landscape changes. The Mediterranean air grows thinner, drier. Rolling hills give way to harsher terrain, and the colors shift from olive green to a baked gold. You're passing through the outer fringes of ancient Persia. Though time feels so squishy, it could just as easily be a dream version of it. A mainstream historical fact. The Greeks were well aware of Persia, and their myths often tangled the real geography of the East with imagined wonders. This boundary zone between Greece and India was a canvas for wild stories, golden ants, talking trees, rivers of honey. Dionysus, naturally, treats every rumor as gospel. You stop at a sleepy outpost that may or may not be real. It's populated by silent robed figures who blink slowly and offer you pomegranates. Dionysus thanks them in a language that seems made of yawns and flute notes. You ask how he knows it. I don't, he says. But they seem to like it. One satrap, a local Persian governor type, invites your group to stay the night. You're led into a tent that smells of saffron and boredom. The satrap's only entertainment seems to be staring pensively at sand. Dionysus fixes this by producing wine from a bowl of dates and hosting what might be history's first pop-up lounge. Soon, the satrap is clapping along to a very slow satyr kazoo solo. His advisors are doing wine, limbo under a decorative tapestry, and someone's pet peacock is wearing a tiara. It's magical, mildly disturbing, and somehow persuasive. By morning, the satrap pledges his emotional allegiance to Dionysus and gives you a camel that hates everyone. Historians still argue whether Dionysus actually passed through Persia or if later storytellers just engineered his journey to mirror Alexander the Great's eastern conquests. The logic is fuzzy, like the goat blanket you're currently using as a scarf. You ride the disgruntled camel while Dionysus walks ahead, periodically feeding it raisins and whispering sweet nothings in broken Persian, Greek, satyr. The desert wind stings your eyes and dries the sweat off your arms before it can even form. Still, there's something soothing about the soft pad of hooves on sand and the distant trill of flutes. Dionysus pauses occasionally to bless a cactus or dance with a tumbleweed. Every time he does, vines curl up from the ground or flowers open unnaturally wide, as if listening. You suspect even the landscape is humoring him at this point. You reach a ridge overlooking a vast plain. Dionysus stops, breathes deeply, and spreads his arms. This, he says, is where it begins. What is this exactly, you ask? The campaign, the unveiling, the festival of me. Below the ridge, there's nothing, just empty space and wind. But first, he adds, we nap. You all collapse in the shade of a scraggly tree. The camel snorts in disdain, but doesn't wander far. One Maenad hums lullabies in a language you've never heard. You drift off wondering if you'll wake up in India or inside a particularly elaborate metaphor. That night, the stars are hazy and the moon looks half asleep. Dionysus sits beside you and whispers stories of the East, of a land so drenched in spice that even the dust tastes like cinnamon, of holy rivers that can laugh, of cities where snakes wear jewels and monkeys recite poetry. You really think they'll let you in? You ask. He smiles. Let me. They won't know I was already there. You don't know what that means. You don't really care. The camel curls up beside you and starts softly snoring. The air hums with invisible music. You close your eyes. The detour has officially begun. The sun rises slowly, like it's considering skipping today. You blink awake, nestled between a disgruntled camel and a Maenad using a wine jug as a pillow. Dionysus is already up, of course, wearing a fresh wreath of fig leaves and explaining the concept of consensual chaos to a scorpion. Today, he says, is a cautionary tale about pirates. He adds, with the tone of someone who's been waiting centuries to say that line, and why you should never underestimate a guy with a wineglass and god-level spite. It starts like this: Dionysus, during one of his early wanderings, before the India vision, before the marching goat band, decides to take a quiet sea cruise. Just a chill day on the water. Unfortunately, a group of Tyrrhenian pirates spots him lounging near the coast. To them, he looks like an overly confident, slightly sparkly youth, clearly rich, possibly confused, definitely kidnap-able. They scoop him up, toss him onto their ship, and start planning to ransom or sell him. Classic mistake. Here's your mainstream historical nugget. The Tyrrhenians were a real sea-faring people, possibly the ancestors of the Etruscans. Ancient Greeks often used their name as a shorthand for generic, bad pirates, which seems like bad PR. Back on the ship, Dionysus says nothing. Just smiles faintly. The crew doesn't notice how the ropes tying him up begin sprouting leaves, or how the deck creaks, not from waves, but from roots. One pirate complains his cup smells weird. Another says the mast is leaking something purple. A third finds a bunch of ivy growing out of his boot. Things escalate. Within minutes, the ship is a jungle. Vines cover every surface. Grapes hang from the rigging. The sails flutter with leaves. One pirate screams as he's gently wrapped in kudzu. Another tries to bail out a barrel of wine like it's water. Then come the animals. A lion, yes, a full lion, appears out of thin air and starts prowling the deck. Ivy tangles the tiller. The figurehead starts humming, and Dionysus, he just sits in the middle, drinking calmly, eyes twinkling with divine menace. You ask, isn't this a bit much? He shrugs. I gave them chances. Eventually, the pirates panic and jump overboard. Most are transformed into dolphins, forever doomed to leap and chirp in the very seas they once ruled. It's poetic justice, with a splash of marine biology. Historians still argue whether this tale reflects an actual incident, a warning against hubris, or simply a mythological metaphor for the overwhelming power of intoxication. Either way, Dionysus never forgets it, and he never sails without floral backup again. As the god recounts this story, your caravan reaches the coast. You stop at a sleepy port town where the boats seem to sigh in the dock. Dionysus rents what he calls a vibe-worthy vessel. It looks more like a glorified raft with ambitions. The crew, 3 satyrs, 2 maenads, and a donkey named Greg who handles morale. You drift along the coast under an indifferent sky, waves slapping gently at the sides of your wood boat. Dionysus lies stretched out under a striped umbrella, sipping something from a shell and dictating a poem about seagulls who refuse therapy. At one point, a merchant ship pulls alongside you. Its captain peers over, sees your entourage, and just keeps going. No one wants a repeat of the Vine incident. Night falls soft and purple. The stars look tipsy. You camp on a beach where the sand is warm as toast and the tide hums lullabies. Dionysus sits beside you, swirling wine that sparkles faintly. You know, he says, power isn't about fear. It's about surprise. And maybe also turning your enemies into marine mammals. You snort. Very educational. He grins. Everything I do is educational. Just not in a curriculum-approved way. You fall asleep to the sounds of satyrs arguing over seashells, maenads braiding seaweed into anklets, and Dionysus softly singing a tune only dolphins understand. The detour is getting deeper, stranger, sleepier, and it's starting to feel like this might not be a detour at all. When you wake, the sea is gone, replaced by dry, cracked earth and the scent of hot wind scraping across ancient stone. The raft, Dionysus explains casually, retired, overnight. It now serves as a wine rack for a sand-dwelling lizard cult somewhere inland. You don't question it. You've officially entered the edge of the Persian world. Those liminal territories historians call satrapies. Places half forgotten even in their own time. Trade routes slouch through sunburnt valleys, dotted with marketplaces where peacocks wear beads, and every merchant insists their spice can cure heartbreak. You ride the camel again. It still hates everyone. Dionysus is in fine form. He's wearing a robe made entirely of woven vine tendrils and reciting poetry to a cactus. He calls this part of the journey the slow boil, the time where momentum simmers and builds. You call it hot, dusty, and confusing, but you say it quietly so the camel doesn't get ideas. The caravan trudges toward the city of Bactra, an ancient trading hub nestled between cultures and slightly behind on plumbing. Your route passes through tiny towns where people stare blankly at Dionysus's procession before deciding it's safer not to ask. One town greets you with silence. The local priest offers you salt and a question. What are you? Dionysus beams. A guest. And suddenly everyone relaxes, because in this part of the world, hospitality outweighs logic. Historians note that Bactria was indeed a cultural crossroads, especially during the Hellenistic period. Greek coins have been found buried next to Buddhist shrines. This land remembers 1,000 contradictions, and now you're adding one more, a god with a tambourine. When you reach the outskirts of Bactra, Dionysus decides it's time to impress. He throws what he calls a soft conquest party. There's wine, of course. There's music. There's a satyr on stilts juggling olives while quoting Homer. And then there are the miracles. Wine pours from dry rocks. A fig tree blossoms in minutes. A local herder's goat gives birth to triplets with perfect synchronized bleats. The townspeople are awed, confused, and very drunk by sunset. You sit beside a sun-baked well as Dionysus explains the art of wine diplomacy. You see, he says, most conquerors use fear. I use fermentation. You glance around. People are laughing, dancing, wearing vines as hats. Even the town's grumpy magistrate is doing a hesitant shuffle while sipping something purple and fizzy. But what do you want from them? You ask. Dionysus looks genuinely puzzled. Nothing. Except maybe a ride to India. And just like that, a caravan is offered. Camels? Donkeys? Mysterious carts full of dried fruit. You're now traveling deeper into the unknown, led by a god, with no map, and far too many party tricks. Fringe fact for the night, some ancient writers claim Dionysus traveled as far as India and converted cities not with armies, but with rites. establishing temples, teaching agriculture, and gently freaking people out. Whether he literally walked this path or his cult spread through trade and story, no one agrees. But the myth sticks. You pass a shrine to a local river spirit. Dionysus leaves a wine goblet. A Maenad sings a lullaby in a minor key. The air buzzes, dry, cracked, full of memory. You stop to rest beneath a lone tree that might be dead or just thinking very slowly. Dionysus curls up in the shade and murmurs about dreams he's had, of elephants with gold, painted tusks, of temples humming with sacred music, of dancers who never sleep. You fall asleep too, hearing faint laughter in the wind. The kind of laughter that might come from gods, or just the desert teasing your thoughts. In the morning, you find a fig growing from your boot. You're too tired to care. The journey east takes on a strange rhythm. 1 part dream, 2 parts dust, and a whole lot of camel grumbling. The terrain flattens, opening into broad valleys dotted with hardy shrubs and the occasional wandering goat that looks suspiciously like it's judging you. The road to India is less of a highway and more of a lazy suggestion, winding past forgotten ruins and whispered rumors. You've officially entered Bactria, where ancient Persian, Greek, and Central Asian influences swirl together like an overcomplicated cocktail. Dionysus, of course, feels right at home. It's like someone spilled culture all over the place and forgot to clean up. He says, flopping dramatically onto a carpet of wild fennel. Your new traveling companions, local Bactrian guides, are skeptical of Dionysus at first. But skepticism doesn't stand a chance against his particular form of diplomacy. That night, in a dusty outpost under a yawning sky, Dionysus turns a communal well into a sangria fountain. He cures someone's hiccups with a song. A goat starts dancing. By morning, the entire town has agreed to host a Dionysian ritual for educational purposes. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Bactria did have exposure to Greek culture, especially after Alexander the Great's campaigns. The region saw an odd blend of Greek and Eastern religious practices. Some temples even featured Heracles and Buddha sharing space. This fusion makes it strangely plausible that a figure like Dionysus might have symbolically traveled here through cult and myth. So Dionysus, always the showman, leans into it. He introduces his rites with flair, masked dances, storytelling vine, wrapped staffs called thursoi, and a drinking game that apparently determines your reincarnation. People are enchanted, bewildered. Some are gently asleep in the corner with grape juice mustaches. As you help hang garlands around an altar made of stacked fruit baskets, Dionysus pulls you aside. "This is it," he whispers. "The frontier of belief. People don't know what I am yet, so I get to be anything. Isn't that risky?" Risky. No. Delightful. Yes. You nod, wondering if he's a god, a metaphor, or just your brain on sand and dehydration. That evening, a minor miracle occurs. One of the Bactrian warlords invites Dionysus to his stronghold. Word has spread of the vine god who brings visions and song. Dionysus accepts, naturally, and insists you wear something less dusty. The stronghold is part fortress, part spice bazaar. Inside, guards line the halls, swords drawn and eyes wary. Dionysus glides through like a breeze, handing out grapes and compliments. The warlord, bare, chested, tattooed, and looking perpetually unimpressed, asks Dionysus what exactly he offers. Joy, the god says simply, and also high-quality entertainment. The warlord doesn't blink. And if I say no, Dionysus leans in, smile lazy. Then your camels start quoting poetry, and your wine turns to vinegar. You're not sure if it's a bluff. Neither is the warlord. They negotiate, if you can call it that, with dancing, toasts, and a slow-motion foot race between 2 satyrs and a local prince. Eventually, the warlord agrees to host a Dionysian shrine as an experiment. Fringe tidbit: some scholars believe the spread of Dionysus's cult to the east may have absorbed elements of local mysticism, including ecstatic rituals and altered states of consciousness. The line between worship and theater was deliciously blurry. As night deepens, The fortress becomes a carnival. Dionysus reclines on a cushion. Maenads serve fermented yogurt drinks, and the satyrs are teaching the local guards how to beatbox using gourds. You're handed a lyre and told to play your dreams. Somehow, you do. Historians still argue whether these wild tales reflect actual events or allegories for cultural diffusion. But you're living it now, and it all feels a little too vivid to be metaphor. You fall asleep inside the fortress walls, curled beneath a mural of a bearded man dancing with a tiger. Dionysus hums nearby, whispering to the stars. The Bactrian night is warm and quiet, like the world's holding its breath. And somewhere, far ahead, India waits, probably confused, possibly ready. You wake up on a floor of flower petals and crumpled silk banners. The air smells like spiced honey and 3-day-old incense. Dionysus is sitting cross, legged beside a small shrine constructed entirely out of cheese. Marketing, he says, gesturing at it with solemn reverence. Today, we build the brand. You groan, stretching your arms and knocking over a goblet that's been repurposed as a candle holder. What brand, Min? He replies, eyes twinkling. Well, us technically. The whole Dionysian thing. The cult, the vibe, the aesthetic. It needs merch. Apparently, somewhere between Bactria and a vague notion of India, Dionysus has decided it's time to formalize his following. Not as a religion, not as a movement, as a lifestyle. A sleepy, chaotic, vine-wrapped lifestyle that somehow still involves matching bracelets. You're roped into helping, literally. One Maenad insists you tie ivy crowns for new initiates. Another is carving tiny wooden masks to sell at local bazaars. A satyr with a suspiciously well-organized spreadsheet is inventorying amphorae painted with Dionysus's smiling face and the phrase, "wanna note." Here's your mainstream historical fact. Dionysian mystery cults were indeed popular in the ancient world, especially in Greece and later in Rome. These secretive religious groups emphasized ecstatic rituals, symbolic rebirth, and the promise of spiritual release. Members were often sworn to secrecy, and initiation ceremonies were theatrical, emotional, and highly immersive. Some scholars liken them to the first immersive theater experiences, with a bit more grape juice. You're handed a scroll titled The Initiate's Handbook, which reads more like a bedtime story than sacred scripture. It includes instructions for emotional dancing, how to interpret dream, goats, and when not to challenge a satyr to a riddle contest. Dionysus wanders through the crowd of followers, blessing people with forehead boops and dramatically vague prophecies. You, he tells a camel, will witness a mango revolution. He turns to you. What do you think of the slogan, "Uncork your spirit"? You shrug. Little touristy. Perfect. He says, and immediately has it painted on a banner. You spend the afternoon helping set up what is essentially an ancient merch table. There's a pile of bronze thursoi for ceremonial waving, little jars of sanctified fig jam, and perfumed oils allegedly sourced from Dionysus's own armpits. You don't ask follow-up questions. Historians still argue whether these cult accoutrements had deep symbolic meaning, or were simply the ancient version of fandom merchandise. One fringe theory even suggests that Dionysian rites helped lay the foundation for early performance art traditions. Whatever the case, your pop-up shrine is drawing a crowd. People arrive slowly at first, curious merchants, traveling scholars, a child who just really likes satyrs, but then more come. Locals bring offerings: bread, flowers, poems hastily scrawled on bark. One man gifts a flute carved from a bird's femur. I dreamed of you, he tells Dionysus, who accepts the gift with a reverent sniff. By nightfall, the whole Oasis feels enchanted. Lanterns flicker above your heads. A group of dancers spins in tight circles, their eyes half closed in trance. Dionysus lounges on a couch made of plush goatskin, humming along to a song that no one remembers starting. You find yourself beside the merchandise pile again, tying ribbons around jars of sacred olive paste. Is this really what he wanted? You ask a Maenad, who's currently teaching a toddler how to chant. She shrugs. I never knows what he wants until we invent it for him. Fringe tidbit. Some ancient commentators criticize Dionysian cults for being too democratic, in that they often included women, foreigners, and lower class individuals. In a society that prized rigid hierarchies, the cult's chaotic inclusivity was both thrilling and threatening. It's perhaps one reason it spread so far and scared so many. That night, Dionysus climbs to the top of a boulder and gives a speech that starts as nonsense and somehow becomes inspiring. He talks about freedom, about how masks reveal more than faces, about sleep as a kind of sacred surrender. You're pretty sure he quotes a satyr mid-snore. You curl up beneath the newly embroidered cult banners. More wine, less wine, and watch the stars flicker like tiny, winking eyes. The desert wind murmurs lullabies through rows of thursoi and fig-scented lanterns. You fall asleep feeling like you've just staffed a very weird music festival, only with more metaphysics and fewer portable toilets. The mystery cult is now open for business. And India? India's getting closer. You wake to the sensation of altitude. Not in your mind, but in your calves, which are very unhappy with how steep the current trail has become. The festival of fig jam and forehead blessings is behind you, replaced now by craggy hills that rise slowly into the realm of real mountains. Welcome to the outer claws of the Himalayas. Dionysus is not a mountain god. That becomes evident immediately when he attempts to wear sandals up a goat path and gets one stuck in a rock crevice. Who builds stairs this vertical? He asks, gesturing at nature itself. No one answers, because all the maenads are busy trying not to fall off a cliff while playing panpipes. Your caravan has grown quieter. The thin air, the wending trails, the distant howls of things you hope are wolves. All of it slows the pace. Even the satyrs look subdued, using walking sticks instead of dancing. The goat, legged among them, now appreciate the irony of hooves on shale. You trudge past jagged slopes and icy streams, your breath visible even at midday. The camel, still with you, now wears a shaggy blanket and has fully committed to passive, aggressive glaring. As you pause to rest in a stone alcove, Dionysus shares another fragment of his wandering lore. These mountains, he says, are sacred to many. He mentions holy men who can levitate, caves that echo in forgotten tongues, and monks who brew beer so strong it causes enlightenment, or, occasionally, temporary blindness. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Himalayas, especially regions like Kashmir and Ladakh, were known crossroads of religious and cultural exchange. Ancient Greeks may not have climbed them, but they certainly heard of the mystics and marvels rumored to exist beyond the high passes. Your group encounters a mountain hermit who speaks in riddles and smells like turmeric. He recognizes Dionysus not as a god, but as the dreamer who forgets he's dreaming. Dionysus offers him wine. The hermit accepts it, drinks deeply, and immediately begins doing cartwheels. The goat watches, unimpressed. That evening, a storm rolls in, slow and deliberate. Lightning crackles above the peaks like divine drumming, and your group takes shelter in a wind-carved cave. It's too small for comfort, but big enough to fit everyone if you ignore personal space. Inside, a satyr retells the story of the pirate ship turned vineyard, adding new details like a talking anchor and a love-struck jellyfish. You're not sure what's true anymore, but you're too tired to care. The night brings strange dreams. You're scaling a mountain made of bread, chased by a flute-playing tiger. Dionysus rides past on a cloud, yelling something about mangoes and destiny. You wake with the taste of honey in your mouth and someone's foot in your ear. In the morning, the air is impossibly clear. You can see the curve of the earth, distant valleys folded like origami. Dionysus gazes at the horizon, draped in wool and wildflowers. We're getting close, he says. I can feel the elephants. You don't bother asking what that means. You descend into a valley where the sun hits at the perfect, sleepy angle. The ground smells of pine and silence. Dionysus finds a hollow tree and declares it a temporary temple. A Maenad starts painting murals on its bark, using crushed berries and goat hair brushes. Fringe tidbit: some fringe scholars believe Dionysus's journey east was symbolic of an inner journey, with the mountains representing trials of the soul, the madness, the rituals, even the wine, seen not as indulgence, but transformation. Whether you believe that or not, it's hard to deny the feeling of shedding something as you walk these trails. A beast stirs nearby, massive, lumbering, not quite visible. The Maenads hush. The satyrs peek nervously over rocks. Dionysus just nods, calmly sipping from a coconut with a tiny parasol. Then it appears a Himalayan bear. Enormous, shaggy, eyes like old stone. It lumbers past without even glancing at you, like it has places to be. One of the Maenads bows. The camel just rolls its eyes. You rest for the night in a pine grove carpeted with soft moss. Dionysus hums a tune that sounds like melting icicles and long-forgotten lullabies. You drift off under a wool blanket that smells faintly of roasted herbs and divine nonsense. The Himalayas have tested you. But you've survived, barely, and with sore thighs. Ahead lies the fabled land. And, apparently, elephants. You finally descend into a lush valley that feels like an exhale. The air is thick and fragrant. Jasmine, sandalwood, something slightly burnt you choose not to investigate. You've made it. You're officially in the land that Dionysus has been vaguely gesturing toward for what feels like months. India. Not the whole subcontinent. Of course, just a corner, a whisper of it. Somewhere in the northwest, where the land undulates with river basins, and palaces sprout like daydreams out of the earth. The heat is not oppressive but velvety, and the birds sing in dialects you can't place. You've traded mountain echoes for temple bells and the constant susurrus of fans on porches. Dionysus immediately throws a welcome party for himself. Not with fireworks or banners, but with a slow procession of flower crowns, curious villagers, and a satyr playing a makeshift sitar made from a melon. He insists it's important to arrive, casually divine. The local king invites him to court, not because he understands who or what Dionysus is, but because anyone who travels with that many goats and has a leopard print parasol must be worth at least a conversation. The court is dazzling. Silk drapes, incense spirals, mirrors reflecting mirrors. Dionysus is given a seat next to a decorative fountain filled with rose petals and mildly judgmental turtles. You're left standing beside a ficus. It's a nice ficus. The king, a wary man with eyes like polished obsidian, addresses Dionysus calmly. So, what exactly are you doing here? Dionysus blinks, clearly delighted by the question. I bring joy. Confusion. Fermentation. The king raises an eyebrow. This sounds like a metaphor. Everything I do is a metaphor. Dionysus replies. Then he produces a goblet and fills it, somehow, with chilled spiced wine. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Alexander the Great believed he was retracing Dionysus's path when he invaded parts of India around 326 BCE. In fact, when Alexander reached a city called Nysa, the locals reportedly told him it was founded by Dionysus himself. Was that true? Almost certainly not. But it was a clever move, and it worked. Back in the court, Dionysus offers wine to the king. The king, wary but intrigued, sips. A beat, then a smile, and just like that, diplomacy. What follows is not a military conquest, but a festival. The locals, once skeptical, are drawn in by the music, the masks, the rituals. Dionysus teaches them the Thyrsus twirl, a ceremonial dance involving vine-covered sticks and occasional fainting. You oversee logistics, like how to store 50 amphorae of wine in a monsoon. The Maenads and the court dancers trade choreography. Satyrs challenge palace guards to drinking contests. The guards win, barely. Dionysus gives a lecture on the metaphysics of intoxication that involves a mango, a goat, and a poorly drawn diagram in the sand. The king watches all this unfold and finally leans over to you. Is he always like this? You nod solemnly. This is him dialed down. Historians still argue whether the Dionysian presence in India was literal, metaphorical, or invented entirely by later writers trying to give Alexander a divine predecessor. The blending of myth and history here is dense. Less of a timeline, more of a vine growing in all directions. Fringe tidbit: there are obscure coins from Greco, Indian territories that depict figures bearing some resemblance to Dionysus, often holding wine vessels, sometimes flanked by panthers. Whether this reflects actual cultic worship or just cultural branding is unknown. You're asked to assist in building a small temple, really more of a gazebo, for Dionysus. It features carved grapevines, a roof shaped like a goblet, and a statue that may or may not resemble a satyr doing jazz hands. Dionysus says it's an interpretive likeness. The court scholars try to categorize him, compare him to their own deities. Is he like Shiva, like Krishna, like a particularly disruptive breeze? Dionysus, meanwhile, is reclining in a hammock made of marigolds, dictating poetry to a turtle. You're not sure if this is the climax of the journey or just another strange chapter. But something has shifted. You're not merely passing through now, you're part of the myth. A detail in the blur between history and bedtime. That night, the stars seem extra watchful. The king hosts a closing banquet with endless courses, music that feels like silk brushing your spine, and dancers whose movements blur into trance. Dionysus stands and gives a toast that begins in Greek, shifts into Sanskrit, and ends in what you suspect is improvised goat. And then, with no real announcement, he says, "Well, leave tomorrow." You blink. Already? He smiles. Detours don't last forever. You fall asleep beside a golden statue of a napping satyr, dreaming of wine that sings lullabies and elephants wrapped in ivy. India welcomed you. But it never stopped asking, "Why are you here?" The next morning, you awaken to the sound of bells. Not temple bells this time, but something deeper, richer, and disturbingly rhythmic. You sit up to find Dionysus painting tiny gold suns on the foreheads of elephants. Yes, elephants. 5 of them, in fact, standing patiently in a line like they're waiting for a very large, extremely slow parade. Their tusks have been wrapped in ivy. Their ears are painted with swirling patterns. One of them is wearing a necklace made entirely of grapes. Dionysus claps his hands with joy. "Behold," he proclaims, "my new sacred chariots." You rub your eyes. "You said we were leaving." "We are," he says. In style. Apparently, this leg of the journey, back toward the west, will not be done on foot. Dionysus insists on staging what he calls an interpretive siege. You ask what that means. He just winks and gestures toward a pile of tambourines. The elephants are part of it. So is a portable wine fountain, 24 flautists, and a Maenad who's somehow trained a parrot to chant. Dionysus conquers gently. It's more than a parade. It's a living, wandering temple, an ode to joyful intrusion. You help organize the rote, which mostly involves preventing satyrs from setting up impromptu dance offs in every village you pass. The elephants move slowly but steadily, their steps shaking the ground like sleepy thunder. Wherever you go, people gather to watch. Some clap. Some pray. Some just stare, deeply confused. Mainstream historical fact: elephants were famously used in ancient Indian and Persian warfare, and their mystique impressed the Greeks immensely. When Alexander encountered them, his men were so in awe that they began referring to them as god beasts. The image of Dionysus riding or traveling with elephants appears in both ancient art and mythology. So here you are, fulfilling the myth, or at least performing it convincingly. Dionysus rides the lead elephant, lounging on a palanquin made of polished wood and animal print cushions. He holds a vine-wrapped staff and waves lazily at passersby. Occasionally, he tosses pomegranate seeds like royal favors. Villages along the route respond in a mix of ways. Some offer food and garlands. Others close their gates and watch nervously from windows. A few children run alongside the procession, trying to pet the elephants and occasionally stealing grapes off the tambourine rack. One town invites you in for a rest. Their local elder insists on hearing Dionysus' story firsthand. Dionysus obliges, telling a version that includes mangoes, meteor showers, and a bear named Kevin. You're pretty sure none of it's true, but the crowd is rapt. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's siege of India was ever intended as a military campaign, or if it was always meant to be symbolic, a conquest of hearts, not walls, a triumph not by sword but song. One fringe account even suggests he conquered a city simply by showing up and offering free wine for 3 days straight. In one village, the satyrs host a nighttime spectacle, shadow puppets, acrobatics, and a musical number titled Surrender to the Grape. It ends with fireworks made of crushed beetles and squeaky flutes. The crowd applauds. A baby throws a fig in celebration. Your camel, still part of the caravan, now wears a bell necklace and answers only to Emperor Grape. You have stopped questioning things. You pass through forests where monkeys mimic the maenads, and rivers where the reflection of Dionysus flickers like a candle, sometimes smiling, sometimes frowning, sometimes just drinking silently. The world feels pliable, like soft clay. At one point, the procession halts for a blessing at a roadside shrine. Dionysus pours wine into a carved basin, then whispers something to the stone idol. The wind stirs. A nearby tree blooms suddenly, out of season. You ask what he said. I thank them for letting us through. Ooh. He doesn't answer, just smiles and keeps walking. That night, the elephants sleep standing, their trunks swaying to the rhythm of maenad lullabies. Dionysus curls beside a brazier and watches the stars. We're not meant to stay, he says, almost too softly to hear. You nod. The parade is a message, not a settlement. A moment that passes through. In the flickering firelight, you glimpse what the myth was always meant to be, not a conquest, but a confession. A god telling the world, I was here. I felt joy. I made others feel it, too. And then onward. You wake to the gentle jingle of bells, a sound so soft it might be imagined. Except that you're lying beneath an elephant, and someone's braided lavender into your hair. Again, the procession has morphed overnight. What began as a makeshift caravan has become something else entirely, a traveling sleep festival, a slow-motion parade dedicated not to conquest or celebration, but to repose. Dionysus has decided that if India will remember him for anything, it should be for inventing the nap as art form. He calls it the Hypnos March. You begin the day horizontal, of course. The elephants move at a dozy pace, their wide backs converted into rolling lounge platforms. Maenads gently fan themselves while curled in hammocks made of sari silk. Satyrs nap in shifts, snoring harmoniously. Dionysus rides reclined beneath a parasol woven from banana leaves, sipping chilled rosewater and issuing sleepy proclamations like, Thou shalt stretch before thou sits, and more cushions, fewer opinions. You float through the landscape like a dream that forgot to end. In each village, the procession pauses not for speeches or rites, but for communal rest. People gather in shaded courtyards. Storytellers murmur myths at half volume. Elders rock in creaky chairs. Babies snooze mid-giggle. Even the dogs seem slower here, their tails wagging in lazy loops. Mainstream historical fact. While Dionysus is famously associated with frenzy and ecstasy, some interpretations of his myth include sacred rest as part of his rites. After all, true madness often requires a calm mind to contrast. The idea of sacred relaxation isn't just a punchline, it's a pillar. So Dionysus, ever the innovator, leans into it. He begins hosting symposia of silence, gatherings where people lie in comfortable positions and just exist. No talking, no questions. Occasionally, someone hums. Everyone nods appreciatively and falls back asleep. One town gives your group a gift, a woven banner that reads, Dionysus, Lord of Restful Revelry. Dionysus cries a little, which you assume is part genuine emotion, part oversteeped wine. You've become the logistics coordinator for a fleet of sleeping mats, pillows, and footbaths. Satyrs roll lavender oil onto their temples before siestas. The camel wears a headband that reads Nap Boss. It seems proud. Fringe tidbit. Some obscure texts suggest that certain Dionysian rituals involved prolonged rest periods, fasting interspersed with sensory deprivation, and even guided dreams. These weren't just spiritual gimmicks, they were pathways to transformation. Rest is revelation, sleep is sacred doorway. And wouldn't you know it, the people love it. Wherever the Hypnos march goes, villagers join. Some stay with the parade for a day, others for weeks. Everyone moves slowly. No one speaks above a whisper after sunset. There are cuddle circles. There are foot massage booths. There's even a Maenad who reads bedtime stories aloud while balancing on one foot. You rest beneath banyan trees, in hammocks strung between spice carts, beside rivers that gurgle lullabies. The world becomes a lull, a sweet vibration in the bones. Even your dreams feel heavier, more deliberate. One evening, you're nestled between two warm satyrs, listening to Dionysus describe the concept of emotional hibernation. You must disappear, he says, voice slurred from comfort to become something else. You ask, what are you becoming? He smiles, eyes half-lidded. A myth people forget on purpose, so they can find it again. The elephants sway in time with some unheard beat. Fireflies blink in unison. Somewhere, a flute plays the laziest song you've ever heard, and it is perfect. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's mythic eastward journey included phases of peace, sleep, and transformation, or if those are modern insertions by scholars who've stared too long into wine cups and philosophy scrolls. But you know this much, no one forgets a nap parade. You wake before dawn to silence, not the eerie kind, the deep, benevolent kind. Everyone around you is breathing in slow harmony. Even the camel's snore is meditative. You realize, in that moment, that rest isn't the pause between adventures. It's the adventure itself. You awaken on a gently rocking platform. Not earth this time, but water. Warm, slow, moving, golden with morning light. You've traded elephants for a boat, a wide, flat vessel that glides like a dream over a mirror, still river. Welcome to the return trip, Dionysus style. The Hypnos march is behind you. The merch table, the nap tents, the mango, perfumed satyrs, all left in your sleepy wake. Now it's just water, song, and a boat that smells faintly of pine and spilled rose wine. Dionysus lounges beneath a parasol made from peacock feathers. He's wearing a robe stitched from festival flags and a crown of starfruit. His eyes are half-lidded, his voice thick with contentment. India was lovely, he murmurs. But the return is where the real magic happens. The river carries you westward. No oars, no sails. Just an invisible current that Dionysus claims is divinely curated. The banks drift lazily past. Lush forests, sleepy villages, monkeys watching from banyan trees. Everything feels hushed, like the world is holding its breath while you float through. You sit near the prow, a satyr curled against your leg. Maenads are braiding necklaces from water lilies. The camel is sprawled awkwardly in the shade, wearing tiny oars on its hooves as a joke. You try not to laugh. You fail. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient myth often frames the east to west return of Dionysus not as a retreat, but as a triumphant rebalancing. A reintegration of the self. Where the journey east is ecstatic and transformative, the journey back is meditative, a soft closing note to the cosmic symphony. Dionysus begins telling stories again, but slowly, lazily. Each tale drips from his lips like honey, one about a tiger who knew poetry, another about a village where people aged backward. Some may be memories, others metaphors. Your past carrying. One day, you pass a floating temple. It's shaped like a lotus blossom, covered in mirrors. The people inside chant softly and toss flower petals into the water. Dionysus tosses back a fig wrapped in gold foil. Barter, he says. Sacred trade. In another village, children line the riverbank and shout greetings. Dionysus waves and sends a cloud of wine, scented mist drifting over them. It settles like perfume. Laughter follows. Fringe tidbit, in some regional variations, Dionysus was seen not only as a bringer of ecstasy, but also a protector of travelers, especially those on spiritual pilgrimages. Some Eastern sects may have adapted his myth into local frameworks, seeing his journey as one of wisdom, gathering, not just chaos. At dusk, the river turns to gold. A Maenad plays a lullaby on a reed flute. Dionysus whispers, time slows here. The return stretches. Let it. You do. You let it. You let your limbs go limp. Your thoughts go soft. The water rocks you gently. You start to feel as if you're not riding on the river, but in it, part of its flow, part of its history. Dionysus sings to the stars, a hymn with no words. You hum along anyway. You pass a crumbling statue of an unknown god, half swallowed by vines. Dionysus tips his cup to it. Every god gets forgotten, he says. Some just take longer. You ask? Will they forget you? He grins. Only until they need me again, that the river is glass. The stars above seem close enough to pluck. A satyr tries. Fails. Falls asleep mid-reach. The boat never docks. It just drifts, slowly west, through dreams and starlight. You fall asleep to the sound of water slapping gently at the hull, Dionysus whispering myths to the moon, and the camel muttering in its sleep something that sounds suspiciously like, I like the nap parade better. You're not sure how long the return will take, days, months, centuries, but it doesn't matter. The journey has changed you. Eventually, the river narrows, the water shallows, and the drifting slows to a crawl, as if even the current doesn't want this ride to end. The boat bumps gently against a dock that wasn't there yesterday. You disembark groggily, still wrapped in sleep and sunlight. Mount Olympus rises faintly in the distance. Yes, that Olympus, home of thunder gods and drama queens. And here you are, grape, stained, elephant, kissed, sandal, blistered, returning from an adventure no one asked for, and even fewer understand. Dionysus is already stepping onto the shore, his robe inexplicably crisp, his crown fresh as if he hadn't just spent weeks napping on elephants and whispering riddles to lizards. He turns to the caravan. Now just a handful of Maenads, satyrs, you, and the eternally annoyed camel, and announces, we are home, sort of. The path to Olympus is paved in clouds, grapevines, and the vague sense that someone's going to be very confused by all this. As you approach the gates, Hermes flies down and lands with a polite cough. What is this? He asks, eyeing the camel, the ivy, the general aura of exhausted mirth. Dionysus grins. Victory lap. Hermes sighs. I'm gonna need a scroll. A satyr hands him a fig wrapped in napkins, close enough. Mount Olympus hasn't changed. Gleaming marble, floating pillars, random thunderclaps. But the vibe shifts as Dionysus strolls through. Gods peek out from columns, whispering. Aphrodite raises an eyebrow. Ares snorts. Athena winces slightly when a Maenad offers her wine in a seashell. You're given a very plush seat beside a fountain that sings softly in ancient Dorian. The camel refuses to come indoors and instead begins grazing on someone's laurel hedge. Then comes the awkward part, the debrief. Zeus summons Dionysus to a high terrace for a chat. Thunder rumbles faintly. You sneak a peek and see the king of the gods rubbing his temples while Dionysus acts out part of the elephant parade using a grape and a feather. Mainstream historical fact. Dionysus was the last god admitted to the Olympian 12. Some myths suggest he had to fight, literally or symbolically, for his place, often in conflict with more orderly deities. His return from India might not just be geographical. It's a declaration of belonging. The other gods gather around. Poseidon asks if the sea got a shout-out. Artemis wants to know if any sacred deer were involved. Hestia, always gentle, just offers you a blanket and a nap. Dionysus finally addresses them all with a toast. Dear Olympians, he says, holding up his cup, I have returned from the east. I bring tales of elephants, mangoes, naps, and moral ambiguity. There's silence. Then Hera snorts into her goblet. Apollo claps slowly. Demeter starts crying and no one asks why. Fringe tidbit. Some cultic texts position Dionysus not as an outsider, but as a reconciler, bringing chaos into the divine order, expanding Olympus's understanding of humanity, emotion, and joy. He doesn't fit, he reshapes. Later, you find yourself in a small vineyard behind the palace. Dionysus joins you, carrying 2 cups and a bottle marked return trip. He hands you one and sits. Tell me, he says, was it a detour? You think about it. About the nap parades, the musical sieges, the fig, jam mystery cult, the soft revolution through song and stillness. No, you say, it was the rote. He clinks his cup to yours. Correct? He tells you that Olympus will soon forget this chapter. That gods are like seasons. They drift, cycle, return under different names. But you'll remember, he says. Even when it fades, you'll remember how it felt. You sip. It tastes like sandalwood and lavender, and a very specific kind of joy. The sun sets. The satyrs start singing a sleepy ballad. Maenads wrap up the vines. Even the camel lies down without a complaint. You look to Dionysus, who is already watching the stars. Next, he whispers, we conquer dreams. You chuckle, but you know he's only half joking. You know how much time has passed. Aches, maybe centuries, disguised as naps. The vineyard Dionysus gifted you has taken root, not just in soil, but in something softer, deeper. Somewhere between memory and myth. It's not on Olympus proper, nor in the mortal world. It exists in, between, like a comma in a sentence you never quite finish. A hillside that leans into the breeze, covered in heavy grape clusters and sun-drunk bees. He didn't ask. He just left it for you one morning with a note tied to a fig tree that read, try not to overwater. Also, you're welcome. You live here now. Sort of each morning, you walk barefoot between the vines, dew soaking your ankles. The air is always sleepy. Not lazy, deeply relaxed like the land itself exhales while you wander. The grapes are unusually cooperative. The satyrs left a long time ago, but you still find their graffiti carved into the bark. Bad poetry, slightly better wine recipes, the occasional philosophical riddle involving snails. The Maenads visit sometimes. They bring stories from other places, distant cities that dream of dancing gods, travelers who swear they met a leopard with a wine jug strapped to its back. You serve them soft cheese, sweet wine, and a quiet place to rest. It always feels like a reunion, even if you've never met. Mainstream, historical fact. Dionysus was one of the few Greek gods believed to return again and again, not just in myth, but in spirit. His cult adapted, resurfaced, rebranded. From rural rituals to Roman festivals to theater traditions, and even modern art. He doesn't end. He reincarnates. You plant more fig trees. Start fermenting your own blends. One day you mix rosemary and crushed olives into a batch on a whim. It tastes like a lullaby. The locals, those who live nearby in ordinary time, start calling you the grape whisperer. You don't correct them. It's close enough. Sometimes at dusk, you see him, Dionysus, walking the edge of the field, barefoot and grinning, his robes fluttering in a breeze that no one else feels. He never comes close, just nods once, a slow motion of shared secret he knows you remember. Fringe theory, some scholars believe Dionysus's long journey to India and back symbolizes the arc of spiritual surrender and return. You go far, you lose yourself, you transform, and then you come home, changed. Quietly radiant. At night, the stars here pulse softly. Crickets play percussion. Wind in the fig trees sings backup. You sip wine under a canopy of vines and wonder if this was always the destination. The world is still loud, but your hill is hushed. One evening, a stranger arrives. They've heard of the vineyard, of the journey, of the god who sleeps under grapevines and teaches truths with tambourines. They ask questions. You smile, pour a cup, and begin telling the story. Your voice is soft. The vines lean closer to listen. And now, the tale fades like a sunset behind silk curtains. The drums have stilled, the tambourines sleep, and even the goat, prints in the dirt, seem to vanish one by one. You're lying back beneath that imaginary fig tree, hearing only the hush of leaves overhead. Everything that once danced now sways gently. The air has thickened to honey. Even your thoughts feel slower, like they're folding themselves into soft paper boats, drifting towards sleep. The journey, through vineyards, over mountains, across rivers, and into dreams, has quieted. Dionysus, wherever he is, rests too. Maybe in another grove, maybe in someone else's bedtime story. His ladder still echoes, faint as a wine-scented breeze. But here, on this hill, everything is still. You feel safe. Full. Not just from the grapes and goat cheese, but from the warmth of the story, the slow magic of its pace. Your body is heavy now. Your eyes barely stay open. And your mind, gently floating down that same sleepy river, toward whatever dreams wait with open arms. You don't need to chase the myth. It lives here, in the hush between heartbeats, in the breath you just took, in the comfort of knowing that detours, however strange, are sometimes the straightest path home. So exhale, and let yourself drift, sweet dreams.